Good morning. We are today for our JEDI Science and Tech Talks with Florin Talpes. Florin, we're very honored to have you today because you are the founder and CEO of one of the most famous European and I could say global cybersecurity firms, 1,600 people based in Bucharest. You've been founded 20 years ago, I think precisely. And what I loved particularly about the description of BitDefender is that we invest 25% of your R&D in revolutionary projects. So this is a real JEDI mentality. So since we want to have these talks as crisp and dynamic as possible, let's dive directly into the topic. Tell us a bit more about you and your main areas of concern and of focus.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, okay, we are very focused on research. In fact, not only 25%, but let's say half of our workforce is in what we call research and development, so engineering. And yes, when we talk about the engineering team is located mainly in Romania, but we are spread over several continents. Now, myself, I graduated pure mathematics, and I used to work initially in research, in computer science research. And by the way, the time I used to work in research, we didn't call what's happening today artificial intelligence, but we named it more, let's say, pattern analysis and machine intelligence. But used to start as a researcher in what is called today AI.
So tell us, I mean, you've been doing AI since then, and we know that today what we see with I would say the traditional viruses or even ransomware is probably just the beginning of the challenges in cybersecurity. So where do you see cybersecurity challenges heading? I mean, we saw this very worrying boom in, for example, ransomware. I saw data that the damage went from 11 to $20 billion. Difficult to estimate always in 2020. Booming in 2021. We saw during the pandemic a lot of healthcare, also hospitals and attacked. What are your main sources of concern?
In fact, let's say the biggest one, because we talk about, let's say, somehow technological frontiers here, is in fact what I should call it, the huge velocity of change of the environment. We have to protect, and that's an environment, and also the environment targeting the environment we are protecting. So all the landscape is changing with a huge velocity here. So I give you some examples just to learn. We are not aware of, but in fact today there are, let's say, two categories of players, the attackers and defenders. But we are not very aware, in fact, that the innovation, what we call it, innovation in the attacks, so I'm talking about the offensive part, is mainly happening with the states. So in fact, states' focus today is developing offensive, let's say, approaches. So we have one trigger of the change, which are the states innovating on how to do the offensive. Okay, we have all the changes in the landscape of technology, of the infrastructure, and we are seeing huge changes here. I just named, by example, the quantum computing. It's evolving. It's at its inception now, but quantum computing, by example, will somehow outline several realities same time. So we'll have technologies like encryption, which at that time we'll call legacy, which will coexist with the new approach of encrypting communication. And as cyber, you have to protect also what is called legacy against quantum. Is like, let's say you have a word like a human word, which is attacked by, let's say, should say societies coming from the future, and you have to protect against them. This is a kind of realities that will be together. And we talk also about the human behavior here. The human behavior changes a lot. We have seen during the pandemic, by example, the buy your own device, the surface you have to protect change completely. Okay, when you try to figure out what's the surface, now is dismantling, I should say, the surface you have to protect. So all these together, in fact, are changing a lot the environment you have to protect. And AI is another, let's say, trigger, because we are seeing since some time, let's say, machine-to-machine fight. Don't forget that cyber, by example, is one of the industries that used to work in machine learning stuff since many years. Now, we have seen that kind of machine and machine. We have seen somehow autonomous attacks. Okay, so sometimes machine and machine are fighting, but with the AI coming, that will change completely, because let's say, in fact, when the AI will fight with the AI and will have also the quantum computing. So could be differences in terms of computing power between the attacker and the defender. Then will be a completely different game, because will be no more surface you have to protect. The surface will be very dynamic, will change every time. The AI will follow some targets that are outside your surface just to penetrate you. So all these are somehow defining what we call the change velocity. Is like we have to learn faster and faster how to protect. Is not enough to, let's say, keep the learning you have used, but you have to learn faster and faster.
So obviously, many questions on the exciting thing you told us. Tell us, you mentioned about legacy, the increased surface. You talked about the fact that surface will actually disappear almost as a concept with AI. How much is, and the fact that we need to be faster and faster, what will be the key success factor? Will it be very small, agile entities? Is there any hope if you're on the defensive part? Or should everybody basically hack back, which is a politically complicated concept? What is your vision on this?
Yeah, in fact, we talk here about a race, once again, because I mentioned that the innovation on the offensive side stays a lot with the states, which are investing a lot. In the innovation on the defense side stays with the private sector. There is hope in the sense that there is this kind of race. There is a race. Is not someone winning all the time. There is a race. Okay, many times you're hearing in the underground that, let's say, some teams are struggling with penetrating some defense. Okay, so there is a race. This is the hope here. Okay, in fact, let's say technology created by one of the sides could be used by the other side, and that's another characteristic of the race here. Now, in terms of, let's say, what's hitting us even more today is the fact that all these changes are hitting somehow what we call the observability. And just keep in mind that, by example, you have to protect smaller organizations, okay, like mid-market organizations or small, which are not so sophisticated in their, let's say, security teams design. In that case, by example, but not only there, the observability, which already it's hit by all these changes, the fact that you cannot observe or you are struggling to observe everything happening in what is still called today the surface. Okay, now the observability is balanced or by the performance, because just think about you try to protect the processor or what's happening in a processor, but when you try to protect, you are somehow overloading the processor. So that could become unacceptable for the infrastructure that is using that kind of power. So working with some parts of the market, the problem becomes even more complex, because you cannot do anything on the security side. You have limits, barrier, like in terms of what kind of performance impact do you have. And here we come to what can be done probably in the future. And already it's we are seeing seeds of that future. By example, everywhere there is a code, where there is a software, you should expect the language developing that code to heal itself automatically. Because, by example, today we are seeing could be microprocessor, could be drivers, could be everywhere. We are seeing code which is vulnerable. Okay, here we talk about observability. Now, in the future, when we are seeing already languages developing there, it's like we are seeing that in the science fiction movies, the languages will heal themselves automatically. It's self-healing languages, okay, in terms of security. For example, that's one kind of approach in the future. Another one could be related to all this changing landscape. It's what we call today autonomous contextual intelligent response. And by example, we have seen recently some very interesting approaches. Probably we are aware of the OpenAI organization, which work on some models called GPTN. Okay, doesn't matter too much, but this, in fact, made like a breakthrough in what we call learning systems. Now, they are related to natural languages. When we are talking about all the infrastructure, what we call today surface, we could call them, let's say, coding languages, could call them system policies, human behavior, all that could be less complex than natural languages. So there is a hope, by example, that using similar methods, we could reach a kind of learning continuously and autonomously about how the environment is changing. How do you collect what we call actionable information, such to be able to slow down or to stop an attack? These are, by example, two directions.
This is very exciting. And so you mentioned to us about learning systems, basically how today attacks, and I would even make a comparison with living viruses, as more as they reproduce and replicate themselves, they adapt to their environment. And we saw that with the mutations currently, that the more they replicate, the more they adapt to the current cures. So there's a hope for the defenders. And how well is Europe in this field? Obviously, you are leading the charge among other firms, but we talk a lot about European technological autonomy. Some people talk about sovereignty. What is your take on that? How well is Europe equipped in the race you mentioned?
Yeah, at least when I'm talking about cybersecurity, in our opinion, that autonomy doesn't work here. Okay, because let's say, don't forget, we are in a partnership. It's called NATO, and there are some global alliances Europe has. And when you're talking about alliances, you talk about technology also here, okay? I know there is a kind of autonomy or sovereignty or anti-globalization, but in fact, when you talk about innovation, the innovation doesn't care about these borders, okay? It's global. So let's think that someone is innovating something on some technology somewhere which has an impact on security. What should you do? Should you go with a kind of mindset that we should copy that because we are not able to, let's say, catch up in a short time? So should we switch to a different mentality, or should you cooperate? So in our opinion here, it's about cooperation, okay? The innovation cannot happen in only one place. It's true that talking about Europe is very strong in what we should call more foundational research or theoretical research, okay? But when we talk about technologies, Europe, it's somehow, I should say, behind here. So to catch up, in fact, we see partnering, okay, and specializing and somehow complementing each other, okay. That's my view in terms of autonomy. Now, what should do Europe? And talking about cybersecurity here, what we are seeing today, by example, and that's a weakness for Europe, not having a unitary, kind of consolidated or consistent one approach, by example, to investigation. Europe is very fragmented. Every time you have to fight with an attack, and you have to do a forensic, and I'm not talking about real-time forensic here, which is the future. You are facing these borders, like we have different legal systems here in this country, a different one here. This is not the case for United States or for China or for Russia, by example, or for Israel, which are really could protect themselves in real time. Europe also has an issue here, in our opinion, that it's weak on what we call state-private collaboration on the cyber domain. Don't forget that what I mentioned is the following. The state generally is offensive-centric, and the private generally is defense-centric. This is not 100%, but this is more about the weights, okay? So here, if you don't build a cooperation between state and private, you don't build the flow of innovation between offensive and defense, or the opposite one, or it's slower, that flow. States like Israel, like United States, are doing greatly that. And a third one, I should say, related to cyber, I should advise European Union to have more, I should call, venture capital, so high risk funding, but backed by European countries, because most of the VCs we are seeing today, which are strong in tech, and I'm talking especially in cyber, are, let's say, US based, and which is a disadvantage for Europe. I should, by example, set up a few, and not only a few, maybe in the future, VC funds backed by European funding. I'm talking about private or state, based in US, based in Israel, by example, going there where, let's say, the innovation in cyber is happening, such to connect and go on a shortcut.
That, I mean, there we could spend an hour on that, but we are coming to the end of our conversation. But what you basically mentioned again is probably the lack of a single digital market on that aspect. Obviously, we have probably you won't say it, but I can allow myself to say we have 27 watchdogs, which obviously is very good from a competence point of view, but it creates a lot of fragmentation within the market. And probably it's a bit related to what you said about VCs, because basically the downside in tech is the same for everybody, but the upside is obviously massive in a continental unified market like the US or China, and is not as big when you make it big in Europe, because you have all these agencies cost. From this point of view, I fully agree with you, especially when we see this merging of defensive and offensive, as you mentioned, especially with AI. My last question would be a more general one, obviously on cyber, but beyond. The pandemic has been a game changer, obviously. What did we learn as European, and what did you learn probably out of that? How did it change science and technology, and what can we do better after that, in this incredible crisis and after this crisis?
Yeah, at least in cyber, we are seeing pandemic not necessarily as a transformational, but in fact, we are seeing pandemic as somehow melted some years, okay, in the fact that what we should have expected to happen in a few years, in 2 to 3 years, is already happening.
Okay? Yeah, incredible acceleration.
Yeah, is like a leap in the future. We are stepping in the future, okay? And that was pandemic, in fact. Is like cut off a few years, and we are already there. Okay. Now, from a cybersecurity point of view, what outlined pandemic, in our opinion, and that's related to cyber, is how important is the resilience? Because we have seen, by example, the education went from, let's say, one place to the distance. Is like work from home instead of work from office, educating children from distance, and you have to build resilience, because is that only one accident or will happen more? Okay, so in cyber, resilience is, let's say, a key word, because let's say we are there. Our business is to build resilience. Our mission is to build resilience for the ones using our solutions, technologies. And I think something good for the science and tech is, let's say, the perception that technology is mandatory for our resilience or our sustainability. That's more than we had before. Is like in education. In education, we didn't understand that access to internet is foundational for education and should be part of the human right to access to education. Now became obvious that, okay, so I think technology somehow, for different reasons, was not central, but is becoming more and more central. It's true that we have to face a challenge, because let's say we are aware that the countries have deficits, and when it's about cutting costs or cutting budgets, unfortunately, let's say the research is one of the favorite ones. But I think technology came more to the center of the focus.
Fascinating. You started with agility at the beginning, and this incredible acceleration that we're witnessing. We talked about the importance of relationship between public and private, the importance for Europe also to have a much more unified approach. And now we obviously are ending on this note on education. And obviously we are today International Women's Day, so we have 50% of the workforce that is not so much into STEM, into technology education, and we need to do so much more because it's a huge potential. Really, Florin, Talpes, this was a very, very exciting conversation. You have a true JEDI spirit, and I really want to thank you for your time and wish you a lot of luck and success for BitDefender.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Florin.
Keep it up.